Good morning. Welcome to the November 4th, 2021 Inspiring Authors Conversation. I'm Kathy Davis, and today we're going to be speaking with Raeleen Murray. Before we welcome her, though, I want to go over a few logistics. First of which is the call is being recorded. You will receive a link to the call, to the YouTube video within about 48 hours or so after this call. Your attendance at these meetings serves as your permission to be seen in the recordings. Please make sure you're muted on your end and find your chat button, usually down at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions, please type them in to the chat and we'll make sure we get to those during the call. We are slated to end the call around noon or shortly thereafter, so we can all get back to the business of the day. Our theme for 2020 continues to be inspiring authors, and we will either have a conversation with an author who is inspiring or someone who is inspiring those authors to be the best authors they can be, which is the case today. So please help me welcome Raeleen Murray. She's passionate about helping people and organizations see the potential within. As a business consultant and executive coach, Raeleen works with clients just beginning to find their way and those more established and looking to expand their possibilities. Raeleen meets people where they are and helps them see not just where they can go, but also how to get there in a way that serves both their internal mission and the greater good. Raeleen, I'm thrilled you could join us today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Kathy. It's great to be here with everyone.
I know one of the things we want to talk about today was how to clarify our mission and our message, which is, I think, perfect for authors, because one of the very first things we like to talk to our authors about is, so let's pretend you write a second book. And what would be the commonality or the common denominator between your series of books, and how would that then play out in your life? So, which quite often then leads to the concept of what is your mission in life and how does that overlap your mission in your writing? So how do people typically, or when do people typically come to you when they have a question? And what kind of question is that?
People come to me in all different kind of spaces. As you said in the bio, some folks are just beginning their career and coming out of college with that, the world is great, big and wide, and where do I begin? Some folks more in the middle of, what I'm doing is fine, but I'm not sure this is really it. And serving my soul inside and looking for kind of the next chapter. And then sometimes it's folks that are kind of in a transition of their life where the focus is becoming less on their for-profit part of their career and shifting maybe away from working in a corporate environment or the job that they've had for most of their life. And what does the next season look like? And so the thing that kind of connects all of these different seasons that we can be in is just people want a sense of belonging. People want a sense of purpose and to feel like our time is valuable, our life matters, and what we do is contributing to something greater than ourselves.
I've seen a lot of that this past 18 months, especially because we were all told to go sit in your corners, and learn how to play well together, or, go isolate, become disconnected from each other. And I see a lot and I'll speak in terms of me, where I've been personally trying to find new ways to connect with people, or new ways, because, I can be on 2 or 3 Zoom calls a day. And even though I'm seeing people, I may not feel as connected to them as I would if I would see them in purpose or in person, one of those. And so go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I've worked with a lot of folks too, as we're kind of coming out of that phase that we've been in, of this weird 20 months. You're absolutely right. We just locked down and everything stopped. And now, as the world is opening up again and we're getting back to our new normal, be intentional about what we put back on our plate. Be intentional about what we put back in our schedule. Don't just go back to doing things because we always did them, but evaluate. Is that still what I want to be doing? Does that still matter to me? Is that still the best use of my time? Because we've all changed in these 20 months. And so I don't know that going back to the way it was is really the ideal way to move forward.
Well, and
And
I've
so,
seen, yeah, I've seen a couple articles, headlines. I think the most recent was the New York Times. The Great Resignation was the title. And it's becoming an epidemic of sorts on its own, where a lot of people are resigning from their jobs, after the past 18 to 20 months. They figured out they didn't really like that job anyway. And so how do you help them into that next, how do they figure out what is that next step? I have figured out I don't like where I was. Now what?
it really begins with introspection. We spend more time with ourselves than with anyone else, but we often don't stop to listen to what we already know inside. And so when someone comes to me with that kind of a question, it always begins with a conversation. And that conversation is really all about going through a lot of questions, things like, what is it that gets me really excited and jumping out of bed in the morning?
Mm-hmm.
What are the things on my calendar that just keep getting pushed to next week? What are the parts of my day in my life that I know I'm really strong and I have a gift in this particular area? Where are the areas that I need to learn more? I need to do some development. We talk about things that you've done in your past that fed your soul, that you really loved. And sometimes it's not those grand, I had the most fabulous job and it made me feel so good about my life. But sometimes it's this tiny little element of something, but it's that nugget of, what was it about that that fed your soul? What was it about that that felt so good to do that? And we also look at, what are things that you've done in your life that you're grateful you no longer do?
Mm-hmm.
And what was it about that that just wasn't a fit? There's a lot of lessons to be learned here.
Do you help people look at their values, and how does that play a role?
Absolutely. There's the values for me that's always where I begin. Because if we're not clear on our values, we're going to wind up realizing that, I love the metaphor of we're leaning our ladder, that we're climbing against the wrong wall.
Yeah.
The values are really where it all begins. And so I always start by going through kind of again, it's always a series of questions, because it's about what's inside of us, what's important to us, and listening to our voice. And so with values, it's, what are the things that are really important to you? What are the guideposts, the things that when you've got a big decision to make, what are the things you take into consideration? And I've always been really clear on what my values are. My values are my family, my health, because I have a very colorful health history. So I know if I don't keep up with my health and my appointments and my follow-ups, that will become the thing that overshadows everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And that everything I do, the way that I spend my time, has to have a mission-centered focus to it. And so that makes answering those, hey, Raeleen, can you help us out with this kind of question, really easy. I don't feel that pressure to always say yes, or something that, people always talk about. It's so hard to say no, and I wind up overscheduled. For me, that's super easy, because I've got my 3 values that I know, does this stay in alignment with my values, or is this opportunity going to take me away from my values? And so it really begins with getting clear on, what are our values, what's really important to us.
And how does that feed into then their mission?
Well, for me, mission and mission and message, sometimes I almost use them interchangeably.
Mm-hmm.
To me, mission means, what is the purpose? Why am I doing what I'm doing? I am very intentional with how I live my life. And so intention comes up a lot also. I would rather make choices about how I spend my time than just bounce off of things willy-nilly. And so as I try to help someone work through, what is their mission, what is their message, a lot of times people will feel like, well, I don't have a message. I'm just an individual. It's easy to see in a room full of authors, the message is the book. And it's, what did I put in my book? What do I want my reader to know or understand after having read my book that they didn't understand before? And you think about organizations having a very clear message. It's often plastered on the wall of the lobby of their offices. It's on the homepage of their website. You can't miss it. But as individuals, we also have a message. We also can have a mission. In the same way that we go into a sales meeting or a board meeting or a team meeting with an agenda and a talking points, a plan of how we want to communicate and what we want to say, I advocate we can go into the rest of our life with that too. What if you go into the grocery store, the dry cleaner, the walk in the neighborhood with an idea of, I'd like to create community around where I go. For me, it's how do we connect people and seeing people as people, looking people in the eye, making sure that the people that came into contact with me today felt seen and heard and acknowledged, no matter how small my interaction was. And so that's mission for me.
Mhm.
And how to help people discover theirs. Somebody's, we're not all going to have that same mission, but it's about those introspective questions on what matters to me and what is my voice and how do I find that?
So how does that mission propel, knowing our mission and our message, how does that propel us forward to be able to figure out how does that help us figure out what our next step is?
Well, it's really fun when I work with someone and I kind of go through this process with them, because there really is that kind of light bulb moment of, gosh, I never thought of it that way. There'll be some, like, and I referred to it before, there's that little nugget that just seems like a random factoid they mention about, this great day that they had and what was so great about it. And we go through, well, I really loved that in this job that I had, sometimes I would have to take customer service calls. So I just really like taking those customer service calls. So then we start talking about, what is it about taking customer service calls that you really enjoy? Well, I really like the interaction with people and I could help people. I could help them solve their problem. Okay, now we're starting to get somewhere. You like helping people. You like interacting with people. You like helping someone get where they need to go. So what are things that you can do that have those elements also?
Mhm.
And start looking for those common threads, like you talked about with what's the thread between the first book and the second book? What's the thread between the things that you really like and that feed your soul and other things that you can do that you haven't really thought about yet? It's breaking down what are the elements of the things that feed your soul. It doesn't always have to be on a phone call, taking customer service calls. That's just the method that got you to the things that you liked about that call.
Mhm. No, that's awesome. What can we do to, once we have identified our mission and our message, then, and we're, kind of thinking about, as we mentioned earlier, there's so many people that have gone from corporate, then they got to the taste of what it's like to work from home. And now they're going, but wait a minute, I like working from home. I don't want to go back to that. How do you help them make that decision, whether it's time to let something go and move forward, or in some cases, hold on to it for a while longer?
Well, it has to begin with some practical matters. The electric company wants to get paid every month. And, so
Mhm.
some people are in a position where they can cut before they've got the next thing to hold on to. And they can, because they've got someone else in their life that's helping them cover the bills, that's providing health insurance and things like that. And sometimes those practical matters have to come forward, have to come first. And so it begins with that, because that's really, if you've got to make sure, you have to make sure you're taking care of the primary needs of our life.
Mhm.
And so that gives you an indicator of what your next step can be and how much you can throw yourself out there or not. That it begins with that. And then it's looking at, the person assessing their threshold for fear and leap of faith. I have one of my favorite quotes is from Frederick Buechner, and he says, "Your vocation in life is where your greatest joy meets the world's greatest need." And so we talk about that leap of faith. And at what point can you, and helping a person assess what their threshold for that is. Some people need the next gig, the next plan. They need it functioning before they can leave the one before. And others can say, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and quit my job so that I can focus on this next idea that I have. And one thing that you mentioned about now, folks that are deciding they no longer want to do corporate life, we're figuring out all these ways to make a living that are beyond non-traditional at this point. I have a 23-year-old, and I remember when we were first looking at colleges in the gosh, I guess it was the late teens, and so many of the schools were saying the jobs you're going to take, we don't even imagine now. Well, now it's post-pandemic, or at least we hope post-pandemic, right? It's certainly post all the lockdowns. It's a whole new game now. And so many people are figuring out ways that they can make money and ways that they can support themselves that no longer involve a 9-to-5 job. Sometimes that's out of, I figured out I can do it and this serves me better. And sometimes it's out of necessity because they've got aging parents they've got to care for, and nursing homes no longer feel like the way to go. And so they're back in the home. There's a lot of different reasons. And so understanding how all those pieces come together, there's no one answer. If someone wants a 5-point plan to your best life and figuring out what's next, go to Barnes and Noble. There's about 300 books there. They'll take you through the 5 steps to your better life.
Mm-hmm.
But really, for lasting, sustainable what's next, it's about what's going on with you and figuring out what your options are going forward.
What comes to mind visually, as a visual person, I see these things in my head, the Venn diagram method of, here's the parts you like. I'm sorry, I'm battling a gnat over here. And then the parts that overlap in the middle, quite often that becomes your focus. So there was a question here, Heidi asked, do you ever find that there's no thread between the first and the second book? Which could also be said, do you ever find there's no thread between the last job and the next job? Quite often that does happen. And surprisingly, when it comes to books anyway, through a conversation, I can sometimes help somebody see even the most minuscule thread that you might not be able to see from your perspective because you're too close to the forest, perhaps, to see the trees. But I'd love to have a conversation with you about that. There may be a way that we could find a connection.
Well, and you're absolutely right. The thing to remember too is we're multidimensional people. We don't just stay here, or at least I think most of us hope we don't just stay here. And so we want to express that multidimensional part of our life, and we really want to feed it because that's where we grow. So I always go back to what are the elements of the things. Talk to me about what was that job entailed, because you can work in manufacturing. In fact, I've worked in manufacturing. I've worked in retail management. I've worked in hardcore corporate America, insurance company, dry. I've worked in small businesses, large businesses, and I think, and at some point I was talking with my kids about sort of when they were getting older and how to decide, what do you want to do and what have you, and talking about all these different experiences I've had that seem so completely unrelated. I mean, I worked for Disney World. How do you relate that to working in dry corporate America? However, the thread that I realized was in every single thing I've ever done was helping people see what was within them, helping people see the untapped potential, helping people was in everything. Even in corporate America, I wound up going from management and operations to really becoming an in-house consultant, doing what we're talking about right now in other offices around the company. That's that thread. What is it that ties these things together? And but sometimes it's the things that you don't imagine. But when you break down the elements, all of a sudden it starts to become really clear. And again, it's that aha, it's that light bulb moment. But don't be afraid if you don't see it yet. Sometimes it just takes time and patience to get there. And sometimes it might be because we're multidimensional people and we have varying interests.
It reminds me of a conversation I had yesterday with a gentleman, recently retired sportscaster for a TV station, and he was talking about he's tired of just sitting at home waiting for something else to happen. He's so used to having this active life, and he has grandchildren, and he's really feeling called and has started writing children's books. And he goes, it has nothing to do with what I've done for the last 30 years of my life. And he said, I don't understand like why I just keep getting pulled to this. And I said, well, perhaps you could be the author that introduces sports to young children through children's books. I said, I don't know if anybody's doing that yet. And he goes, oh yeah. He says, I do know a lot about sports. And so it was a whole new, again, the part where he was so close to the subject that it didn't even make sense for him to think, oh yeah, I can use what I've learned all these decades and maybe just use it in a different way and reframe it so that children learn to love sports at a young age in books that get that message across to those children. And
exactly,
it was like,
you
now
broke down the element.
Yeah. It's like, okay, now I've got a mission. I'm going to go try that. So then it's like, okay, call me back when you get that done. It's like he had his homework, he had his assignment. So.
Right. But you helped him find the element. You helped him find that string that ties what he used to do and what was really, really comfortable.
Yeah.
And he knew and was confident in to this new thing.
And he was having a grand old time staying home and playing with the grandkids. But it's like, what else can I do with this? And it's like, well, here's a thought. Yeah. And
Right.
so I want to remind everybody is if you do have a question, please drop it into the chat. We'll make sure we get it answered. We have a small enough group today that, also just kind of raise your hand. You have at the bottom of your screen is a reaction button. And in that reaction button, there's a hand. You can just hit that button and raise it, and I'll acknowledge you and we'll unmute you and get you on and get your questions answered. So now that I have let's pretend that I have my message and my golden thread has been identified, as I call it. How do I get that message out to the world? How do I share that? Now, what do I do? Now that I've figured out maybe, I've looked at my values, I figured out that I want a better way of doing things. And it has led me down the path of perhaps self-employment. Now, what do I do?
Well, I'm going to go right back to what are your values? What are the values that we need to make sure we're still honoring and we're not drawing away from? So I've got my message and I want to share it with the world. And someone says, but I have this, it's burning inside of me and I need to get it out. What do I want to do? Do I want to go become an international speaker? Do I want to have a stable of consultants that I work with in all these different areas of business? Do I want to work with individuals one-on-one? Do I want to write a book that I can then use as a workbook when I work with corporate clients? How do you want to get that message out? But it's got to align with your values. It has to stay in alignment with the things that are important to you. So and to go back to use me as an example, for me, my family is the thing that's most important. And so that's why I do the work that I do now with individuals and organizations, just me with them one-on-one. And sometimes one-on-one is one with one room of people in an organization. But for me, choosing to create a large company was not the direction I wanted to go, because I want the flexibility to keep my family value the way it is in my life for right now, for the season that my family is in. For someone else, the answer will be different. But that it really starts with, well, how do you want to spend your days, your evenings, and your weekends? What are you willing to change about the way that you spend your time now to get your message out there?
And do you have a process?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, do you have a process that will help someone figure out what their values and their priorities are?
I do. I kind of have a series of questions that I go through with them. There's a really great resource. Oh gosh, and I'm terrible with names. The author's first name is Jenny, which will help you a lot. But the book is The Best Year Yet. And that is a really great book. It's a great framework. I use elements of that, but I kind of change them up for ways that I think just work a little better in my brain. No disrespect to her. I always, respect the work that she's done. And whenever I work with anyone, I certainly credit that I am basing it on that. But that's a great place for someone to look to begin. And that again starts with introspection. That's the process, is what have I learned, to think about where to go from here as we sit in November of 2021. After having lived the last 20 months of our life, what have we learned about ourselves in the last 20 months we didn't know before? We've all learned something. And so start with that, because what we might have felt were things that were really important to us 3 years ago may feel very, very different right now.
I've seen a lot of that. Yeah.
And it's important to honor that and to not just plow through and pretend like none of that happened. And, but honor what we've all been through and incorporate that in our plan. What have I learned about myself? What are the things that are important to me? And what it sounds kind of silly to say it really is as simple as that, except it really is as simple as that. You go through what are the things that are important to me? What are the things that get me really excited? What are the things that I haven't tried yet that I've always wondered about? And is now the time to look into that a little bit?
It's kind of like, if you can imagine either being a child or seeing a child, you pull into a playground park area, and in front of them are all these equipment. I remember as a kid, we had the ones that I think they called, excuse me, the death traps. Excuse me. Raeleen, go ahead. I can't talk.
Feel free to grab some more water, Kathy. We don't want to see you go down there. What questions does anyone have today? What can we talk about as a group?
So let's see, let's unmute everybody. Excuse me. Heidi, you have a question.
Yeah, Raeleen, how much of this do you think of your work like this affects relationships, especially with relationship-based businesses?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
So how much of this work that you do affects relationships, especially given like relationship-based businesses?
Oh, it's all about relationships. Everything is about relationships. And I think that's the heart of what I do. I will, when I'm working with someone, in a relationship-based business, if you're talking about something that's like a sales type of situation, I love to give the analogy when you're at a party and someone says, "Oh, I'm in sales," you want to watch everybody in that half the room go to the other side of the room, because nobody wants to be sold. However, if you're at a party and you say, "Oh, I help people," then everyone gets a little closer. Well, what's your product or service? What is it that you do that you help people? And could it help me? People want to learn more. It's about the relationship. But yeah, I work with some speakers, and when you talk about landing an event, you can land a one-off, but if you develop a relationship with a client, then you've got a long-term relationship with them. You can help them create change within their organization. And it's all about the relationship.
Shannon,
Sorry, go
Shannon
ahead.
has, yeah, Shannon has a great question. Shannon, are you live with us now?
I think so. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can.
Okay. And sorry, I'm still in my car and I hear a baby crying somewhere. I'm just like so distracted at the moment. Yeah, so my question was, so I was a CEO. I built a museum here in St. Louis. You know, I had this very high stress job going into COVID. Ultimately, during all of it, fired myself and went through this process of now what do I want to do? And I'm in a very fortunate situation where I could do whatever I want. You know, I can have fun. I can just, you know, essentially retire. But I'm really struggling with when people ask me, what do you do? What to say. And, you know, I went through my values and my values are, you know, I for so long, I suffer from Crohn's disease. So health is one of my priorities. Family is one of my priorities. I had so little to give while I was in this CEO position and this museum position that I want to spend this time with my family. But I teach at WashU also a few courses. And I feel like, you know, I wrote a book with Kathy. So it's like I'm all over the place. And how do I share what I do, maybe using my values versus I'm this one thing? Because I'm not this one thing. I'm so many things. So what would you recommend for something like that?
What I'm hearing you say is you don't know how to articulate your mission. You don't know how to articulate how you're choosing to spend your time. You don't know how to articulate what you're doing with your life right now. You're talking about these different roles that you have, but why are you choosing to do these things? What is it that ties them together? It's just a matter of finding the words to put on why you've built your life the way you built it, because you're doing what we were talking about earlier. If you were, I think you were here for that of how do I want to rebuild my life now that we're coming out of this pandemic? And you're doing that. You're like, I like this, I like that, I like that. Okay, this is my plate. This is what I'm going to work with. And what you're looking for is literally articulating that. That's what you haven't found yet. It's a sentence.
Okay. Is that part of that book you were just describing of like how to
No, and I will be very quick to say there is no 6-point plan for that. But it's, you know, ask yourself why you're doing the things that you're doing. Why did you choose to keep the teaching position with WashU? What was it that inspired you to write the book? What did you talk about in your book? You know, it sounds to me like you're kind of looking for that cocktail party answer. So Shannon, what do you do? And it can be really uncomfortable when we've transitioned from what we used to do, our role, our title that was really comfortable, into this new space. And I don't know what to call it yet. And that's what you're looking for. You had a CEO position before, and now you're doing these different things. What is it about the WashU position that made you want to keep that? And I'm not asking you to answer this for the group that's going to be recorded and put out on the internet later by Kathy. But those are questions to ask yourself. Why did I keep that? Why did I write that book? What do they have to do with each other? Because I guarantee you, there's going to be some commonality to the things that you chose to put back on your plate.
Okay.
One of the other things that I've heard someone say who was going through a transition is that I'm no longer doing. I now start each day being. And so maybe it's more of an act of what is it that you're being today rather than doing now. Just something to think about.
And you can think about too, what is the focus of my life? What is the focus of what I do with my day? You know, get to the end of your day, or maybe it's, you know, Saturday morning, however it works in your schedule. And what were the things that were important to me that I did this week? And you can look at it from a task standpoint like that. But why were they important? Why did I make sure that I got them done? And what are the things I'm hoping to do next week? again, you're going to find there's commonalities there if you
Okay.
break
Awesome.
down the elements.
Okay.
I love that. Thank you, Shannon. And thank you, Heidi, for asking those questions. So I wanted to apologize for losing my voice. It is a peak allergy season for me, so I apologize for that. Thank you for keeping the momentum going. So Heidi, are there any words of wisdom that you could give us as we start to sign off here that we could carry with us into the day and the rest of our week?
Well, you said Heidi. Did you mean me?
I met Raeleen, yes.
I'm guessing, and Heidi's like, I didn't know there was going to be quiz at the end of this.
Yeah.
I think, given that we're talking to a room full of authors, write what you know, write where you see the void in the work in the marketplace. If I could articulate it, it would be great. Write what you know, write the book that you wish was there, that is no longer, that is currently not in the marketplace. What is it you want to pick up when the house goes quiet? And just listen to what's inside. It sounds really simple. And I get a lot of times people will say, yeah, sure, that sounds a little ooey gooey for me. But then when you start going through it, every single time, it just appears.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's a great way to close. I will remind everybody that we will send out a link to the recording, and we'll have Raeleen's contact information on there so you can reach out to her and circle back with her. I greatly appreciate everyone being here today. November is a short month in terms of our lunch and learns. Our next one is not until the second week of December, and we're interviewing a self-published gentleman. I believe he's out of Texas, and he has had some really good experience in sales of his books, and we're going to just be kind of picking his brain about how he's done that as a self-published author. So be watching for information about that. I greatly appreciate you being here today, and my apologies again for choking up midstream. Thanks, guys, for being here.
Thank you.
We'll talk later. Bye-bye.